Today on Pilot's Discretion, our guest is airline pilot and flight simulator builder Steve McNeilly. He talks about the changing airline industry, creating one-of-a-kind simulators, and how music and flying intersect. Pilot's Discretion starts right now. Hi, everyone. I'm John Zimmerman, and thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion from Sporties. Visit sporties.com/podcast for today's show links and access to our complete archives. Also, as we approach our 100th episode here at Pilot's Discretion, send us an email with your comments, guest ideas, or your favorite episodes. You can reach us at podcast@sporties.com. Today, I am joined by Steve McNeilly, one of those wonderful people in aviation whom I have crossed paths with many times in many different roles over the last 25 years. He soloed in a glider at age 14 and has been flying ever since, earning ATP, CFI, and A&P certificates along the way. Today, he is a captain for a major U.S. airline, but he's into so much more than that, including software development, flight simulators, and music. We'll try to talk about all of that. Steve, welcome to Pilot's Discretion.
Great. Thanks so much for having me on board the podcast here. This is a lot of fun. So, when you asked me to do this, I was really excited. Thanks so much, John.
Well, let's talk about what you do today, the airline world. Steve, as the airline pilot, because you've been through a lot in your 25 plus years in that role, including, I think, at least 2 furloughs, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So right now we have a whole new generation of pilots who are entering the industry. And so from your perspective, what is the right mindset for someone putting on that uniform for the first time? Knowing what you know today, what do you wish you could go back and tell a young Steve McNeilly who's joining the airline world?
You know, it is a challenge. There's just no getting around that. So growing up, I didn't have any family members that were in aviation, certainly nobody that was a pilot. So finding mentors back in the 1980s was really tough to do. Because of that, I didn't know what I didn't know. Today, it's a different story. We have so many mentorship programs available, so many scholarship programs available, so many resources, organizations, groups, and people willing to help somebody that's young getting into the airline business. That's great. I mean, that's exactly how it should be. So, for me, it was definitely a challenge. Like I said, not knowing what you don't know. And it was interesting. I grew up right next to O'Hare Airport. I mean, we were just about 2.5 miles off the departure end of the old runway 9 right, I think it was. And so just every day, jets were screaming over the house. I mean, you could almost walk outside and feel the exhaust and the jet fuel just dripping on top of you, and I loved it. I mean, the windows would rattle with every 727 that went on right over the house. I mean, it was loud, and I loved it. I used to just get out a lawn chair, put it outside, read my private pilot manual at age 13, and just soak it in. It's funny. I thought everybody lived next to a gigantic airport, and I thought O'Hare was how all airports are. Quick funny story. Walking to school one day, I think I was about 9 years old or so. I had gotten the flying bug even by that age pretty early. The crossing guard, she knew that I was always talking about airplanes and looking at airplanes as they flew overhead. And so she goes, so I take it you want to fly a Cessna? And I looked at her and I said, what's a Cessna? To me, the world of big jets, that's what I knew growing up. But, getting back to your question about helping young people, the resources available today are really, really great. I'm mentoring a few people on the side. One of them has soloed. I'm very proud of her. So that's gone really, really well. But that's kind of what I love about this is that the aviation training world has really progressed. And being able to help somebody with all the complicated steps of making it to an airline is really key. But the other key is that you have to have this dying, never-ending passion to make it happen. And that's the big thing that I tell the people that I'm mentoring right now. It's kind of like 4 things you have to have. You do have to have money to fund your flying. You have to have an enormous amount of time. And you have to have the vision to see it through all the way to the end. And you do have to have the aptitude to do it. That's a simple fact. Especially with instrument flight, everything we do at an airline is instrument flying. That is the core foundation of professional career flying. So instrument flying skills are absolutely essential to be rock solid with instrument flying.
Have you noticed a change in the personality or the background of new first officers you're flying with over the last decade, or is it still the same basic person who's attracted to the aviation industry with the same basic background as they get into the airline world?
That is a really good question. Um, so the some of the younger first officers that I fly with do make fun of me for my giant old school flight bag that I still carry with me to this day, only because it fits perfectly on the sidewall of the cockpit and I can get everything I need with one hand. But yeah, they're always teasing me like, what else do I have in there? My VCR and my flip phone and all that stuff. It is pretty funny, but in terms of their abilities and their commitment to doing the job safely, I'm very impressed with the job that they do. I don't see any difference with the younger generation first officers coming on board. We hire exceptionally good first officers at my company. They're outstanding. They're hardworking. They're part of the team. I know that I can entrust the airplane in their hands at any given moment if I need to. So I guess that's the interesting thing. Generationally, we might hear, oh, the young generation's on board back in my day, things like that. But I don't think that's the case. I'm very proud to work with them. And I really, really quite enjoy flying with them. I also love it when they pull something out of the manual that I wasn't aware of. If they've recently been to the schoolhouse and are aware of something that maybe slipped my mind or that I'd long forgotten, because I've been flying this airplane for 21 years now, pretty long time. So I always appreciate it when they bring something like that up. So
Yeah, that's always great to learn from somebody who's been through the formal training part more recently than you. I always learn
yeah,
something from brand new private pilots who may lack some of my knowledge on certain topics, but I certainly lack some of their formal training on some things.
right.
But how about the other way around? So what's an example of a skill you simply have to learn on the job? You're not going to learn it during flight training. You're not going to learn it in the simulator. What's something that you really don't pick up until you're flying the line?
Landing the airplane is a challenge. This airplane that we fly, it's an old school airplane. It's no two landings are the same. And I do remember for myself, 21 years ago when I flew the 737 for the first time. Um, it, it was nothing like the simulator. Of course, I was landing it at Chicago Midway Airport for the first time. That was my first flight on IOE. IOE is initial operating experience. That's after you've been through the schoolhouse and the simulator. Now you're being put in the airplane with a full load of passengers. You've got a check airman in the captain's seat, and it's a learning process for about, I don't know, 25 hours or however many it is. But I do remember that putting that airplane on the runway was nothing like the simulator. And my first few landings were pretty rough. The first ones were into Midway, Chicago Midway, where the runways are super short. The airport is 1 square mile, if anyone's not familiar with Midway. And then into LaGuardia, also short runways, extremely demanding airspace environment. And I pranged it on pretty hard. To this day, I remember those landings. I was afraid that I dropped the overhead masks or something, which I didn't. But I do remember on the third landing, then the check airman, he was awesome. Uh, I'm coming in. I think I'm flaring, and all of a sudden he just starts saying, "Pull, pull, pull," and I was just pulling as hard as I could on the yoke and just greased it on. And that's where I learned that's how you got to land this airplane. So there's by the time you make it to a major airline, you've been through a lot. You certainly have all your ratings. I would hope that you're a flight instructor, although not everybody is, because I think flight instructing really gives you tremendous perspective and additional knowledge as a pilot it really fine tunes your skills. But, you've also, maybe you've flown charter or you've flown corporate or, um, you've most likely made it to the regional airlines. On the military side, those men and women, they've been through a lot. They've been highly vetted by the military. They've been through initial and advanced flight training. They've even done things like survival school. They've been through deployments and all sorts of incredibly difficult things. So by the time you make it to a major airline, whether you're civilian or military, you've learned a lot. I hate to say pay your dues. I've never liked that phrase because it kind of implies that you're just there putting up with baloney until you finally make it to the big time. But that's not the case. As you know, as a private pilot, it's essential. Let's take the private VFR pilot. It's essential to be a professional no matter what you do. So the word professional doesn't mean that you fly for a career or that it's your job. Being a professional means that you are prepared, that you've done your preparation, that you are flying an airworthy airplane, and that you yourself are mentally airworthy and capable, not fatigued, and that you're not pushing your limits. You're staying within your personal minimums, as we like to say. Uh, and of course, one of the things that I always taught my flight students back in the day was the importance of doing the right thing, even when nobody's looking. And I believe we have that tenet at the airline too. It's absolutely essential. We owe it to those passengers for a safe flight every single time. And that's what it means to be a professional. Um, yeah, so I hope that answers your question. I probably got off topic a bit there.
Well, that lines up my next question, which is about those building blocks. I agree it's not paying your dues, it's the real world training. You came up through what I would call the traditional GA route, the non-military route. You flew Aztecs for a charter operator, then turboprops for a commuter airline, what I would call very much a traditional route up until maybe 10 years ago. Nowadays, you have a lot of people going right from flight instructor right into the right seat of an RJ, maybe at a regional airline. What are some things you learned from those earlier experiences flying those different airplanes that help you even today at the airline?
One of the biggest things I think was learning to say no. And the charter operation that I was flying at, it was single pilot, all weather passenger charter. So we're operating at incredibly small airports in snowy Great Lakes conditions, bad in-flight icing. There were just a lot of situations where this Aztec was not built for that kind of weather. I remember there was one time I flew to an airport. I was supposed to pick up 3 passengers. Well, there ended up being 4, as well as a ton of luggage. And I did the weight and balance, knowing that the plane wasn't. It was going to be over gross. And sure enough, I had to tell the passengers, "I'm sorry, this is not going to work. This is what we chartered for. This is what's within the aircraft capabilities and limitations. I cannot take this 4th person." And so, really, the ability to say no during those critical moments is key. But also, it is our job to get the airplane from A to B. And so, learning the right way to operate flights safely within limitations, within your operations specifications, as we call them at the airline, is really key. But there are those rare moments where the weather is just too much. Um, or there are other factors. Maybe if we've got a passenger that is ill and cannot be transported by air, we do have to say no occasionally. We don't like doing it, but it also helps. And I think this is good advice for those seeking an airline career, is to work with your operations center and try to find a solution to what it is you're trying to do. Maybe choosing a different alternate, maybe planning a different runway if possible, or maybe even a fuel stop to try to make the flight happen, or maybe a different place to de-ice the airplane right before takeoff. So there are a lot of tricks of the trade that we can do that are perfectly legal and that we should be using to help get the job done.
That's such a good point because I see so many new pilots go to one extreme or the other. Either I'm going to cancel at the first sign that anything is not perfect in the weather or the airplane or whatever it might be. On the other hand, the people that are going to go no matter what, be the hero, make the mission complete. And to me, being a professional pilot, a lot of it is finding that balance of being able to say no and staying safe, but also getting the flight done when it is safe and not being spring loaded to cancel at the very first sign of any potential issue. So I think that's tremendous advice. And that is what some of those early experiences are so good for. Are there, I mean, are those jobs still out there? You know, some of the traditional hauling checks at night, those are pretty much gone. Most of the regional airlines are now jets. I mean, are there some of those options still out there? Do you see opportunities for a young person who's maybe building time and wants to get some of that real world experience? What are some good options?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in the job market in the early 1990s, it was incredibly rough. There was a glut of pilots, so few jobs. Um, there were so few jobs that there was an ad in an aircraft training newspaper. And basically, it was advertising for space shuttle time and SR 71 time. The list goes on. And the job description, it was a joke, but it said flight instruction in a Cessna 152. And the point was, there were so few jobs that once you did get on with that cargo carrier or flying checks or something, you had to have tremendous qualifications. Today, I think it's a lot more reasonable. So in the city where I live, there are actually two Part 135 cargo operators, and they do hire pilots with fairly low time. Now, that's tough work. You're going to be working at night. You're going to be flying these old turboprops. Um, it's you're going to be in all weather situations, but that kind of experience is worth its weight in gold. So, to the flight instructor that needs to move on, for instance, I think that today's opportunities are a lot better. And I think that those airplanes are far better maintained today than perhaps what I saw many, many decades ago. So, again, I think that this era of being a pilot it's certainly the best I've ever seen. There are so many opportunities ranging from starting out to getting that first job in a turboprop to getting that first job with a regional airline and then getting on with one of the major airlines. The opportunities are amazing.
And of course, the last step there is upgrading to captain, which recently a lot of people have been doing faster than usual, even there. So let's take that final step. What's your advice to a newly upgrading captain that they've been flying airlines? Obviously, they know how to land the airplane. They've learned some of these lessons. But what's the best piece of advice you would give to the person who's getting that fourth stripe?
Believe it or not, I think that it's a combination of being kind to your crew, meaning your first officer, and I shouldn't say the first officer and the flight attendants, being kind to them and doing literally what we call servant leadership, where you are pilot in command. You are the final authority in the airplane. You are the leader. You're also the on-site leader for anything that happens. And you need that team on board with you. You want them willingly to help out, to step up when they need to remember their training, to apply their training as needed. Believe it or not, being kind and thoughtful of their needs goes a long way. That's something that I always try to keep in mind. I hope I never forget as captain. But it's amazing how since they do hire such great people to begin with, being kind to them and serving them and their needs is so essential. Uh, the other thing I'd say as a captain is that you have to be a good monitor of everything. And that's true also if you're a first officer, but more so as the captain. Pilot monitoring skills, and so in an airliner, for anybody that doesn't work for an airline, we have what's called pilot flying and we have what's called pilot monitoring, and we switch off. So the pilot flying is the sole manipulator of the controls, as we say, making all the in-flight decisions. The pilot monitoring is actively watching every single thing that goes on. And as captain, you've really got to step up your pilot monitoring skills that much more. That can be a little exhausting. It's a little tiring. You need to be watching constantly everything that's going on in the flight. That's your job as captain. It is also your job as first officer. But again, captain is the final decision-making authority. So those are the two things I'd say.
Excellent advice. Steve, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to ask you about your crazy sim building world.
Sounds good.
Ready to ace your flight training? With Sporty's pilot training courses, you get free lifetime updates. No extra fees. Ever. New for 2025, we've added aviation-specific AI tools, ChatDPE for real-time exam prep, and Chat FAR to decode tricky aviation regulations. It's more than just test prep. It's smarter, faster learning. Get started today at sportys.com/learn-to-fly. Now, back to Pilot's Discretion.
We are back with Steve McNeilly, who in his spare time has built what has to be the most impressive home flight simulator I've ever seen. Steve, tell us first about this project. Why did you decide to build a life-size sim to replicate the Vulcan bomber, a legendary airplane in Britain? What were you thinking, and how did you do it?
That's the biggest question I get more than anything. As a kid, growing up in Chicago, we had the Lakefront Air and Water Show. So at age like 8 and 9 years old, my sister and all her buddies, my sister was older, she's 8 years older, they'd take me downtown for the air show, and I just have memories of sitting in the sun on the Chicago beach with the air show going on. But the Brits, the British, the Royal Air Force would be there with their Vulcan bomber. This is a 4-engine nuclear bomber from the 1950s, dating back to the Cold War. But it's iconic. It's a giant delta wing airplane. It's a big airplane, and it's loud. And so watching that giant delta shape going right over the water, 200 feet above, just engine screaming, was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It was also featured in the James Bond movie Thunderball. If anybody wants to rent that, it's an awesome movie where they put one into the ocean to harvest the bombs that are on it. But anyway, so many years ago, I ended a flying trip. I'm watching late night YouTube. I saw that a group over in England had built a Vulcan flight simulator from scratch. The light bulb went on, and I figured I got to have one of those. So, yeah, I had never built a flight simulator before, and I figured, what the heck, I'm going to start. And I did build it with as many aviation building techniques as possible. I am an A&P mechanic, so it's aluminum riveted structure. I did all the technical drawings myself, just did a ton of research. I did have my friend Art down in Florida. He's tremendous. He built the flight control rig for me as well as a throttle quadrant. It's a beautiful, exact replica of the real thing. And so there was some software from several companies in the Netherlands, of all places, that are making incredible flight simulator building software. And so kind of it was the right place, the right time, all these technologies coming together, somebody of my feeble brain able to make it all happen. And it actually turned out just beautifully. It's incredibly immersive. It's got a 16-foot diameter wraparound visual system, so you get those peripheral vision cues. It's so realistic that I will have people, non-pilots, I'll take them for a spin in the simulator, and they'll get out and they'll say, "So, how much were we moving in this?" And I'll say, "Well, not at all. It's a fixed base simulator." They're like, "No. I could feel myself moving around." So that's how immersive it is. But I mean, it's a lot of fun. To me, I love the early jet age. Those early 1950s jets. It's kind of a cool crossover between World War II bomber meets the jet age, so to speak. So for me, I just love that part of history. And so that's why I built it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fascinating time when it was almost like the gumption and the vision was ahead of the science, and they said, forget it, we'll build it anyway. We'll just add a couple more engines. You can look at the B-36 or the B-52 or the Vulcan and just see absolute guts, really, is what I see when I look at those airplanes. which I guess leads
Yeah.
to your current project, which is very much in the same vein. You're now building a Comet sim. So you clearly have a thing for British early jets. Tell us about that, and particularly your personal connection to the Comet.
That too is a good question. And to move on to the Comet, let me just say if anybody wants to see details about the Vulcan simulator, it's at www.avtutorials.com/Vulcan_simulator. That's kind of a mouthful, but some cool photos from that project. With the Comet, again, I grew up right next to O'Hare, and as a kid, there was an old abandoned jet. I've got a documentary on YouTube about it, and it was a de Havilland Comet 4C model. It was derelict, flew into O'Hare in 1979, and it never flew out again. By the 1980s, as a high schooler, the Rotary Club of Chicago was starting an effort to save the airplane, and we had a deal to dismantle it and ship it to a very large museum at the time. So, as a high schooler, before I could even get a driver's license, I was riding my 10 speed out to O'Hare. I'd get out to the Air National Guard shack. They knew who I was. They'd wave me through, and I'd go ride my bike over to the Comet Project. And that's how I spent my afternoons. If I wasn't taking flying lessons, or in the doing music and other stuff, I was taking apart the Comet, and it was amazing. I mean, it's a big airplane. It's the size of a 737-800. So over the course of many years, we dropped the engines, we dropped the landing gear, took the wings off, tail surfaces. We had it all completed and ready to go to the museum. The airplane was suddenly chopped up into pieces. I don't know the full story behind that. By that point, I was in college in A&P and flight school, and my life was incredibly busy, focused on the career. So really, sadly, that part of history got destroyed. There were two other sister airplanes to it, two other Comets. One of them wound up in Mexico City. They put it in the Mexico City Zoo, where it corroded away, and they finally chopped it up and tore it down. The third sister airplane still exists. It's up in Painfield, Washington, just north of Seattle, and it's at the Restoration Center. The museum there has done a phenomenal job of restoring the interior of the airplane, and so it's really just amazing. Um, since the O'Hare Comet was broken up, to this day, it's incredibly sad to me. Such an iconic piece of equipment. And for those who don't know, the de Havilland Comet was the first jet airliner. It first flew in 1949. So this is war-torn England with, they're trying to rebuild their industry, their cities, everything else. And they were the world's leader in jet engine technology. The United States basically bought jet engine technology from the British, and that's how we developed our jet fighters and jet bombers in that era. So this was such an iconic airplane. And again, to have one of these destroyed in Chicago was really devastating. Fast forwarding today, again, I built the Vulcan simulator, and it's great, and I love it, but I was like, time to build the next project. So I contacted a few museums. I asked them, hey, can I acquire your Comet nodes that you have? Every museum that I asked kindly said no, unfortunately. And so then my next plan was, well, then I'm going to have to build one. And so me and a small team of helpers for the last 2 years, we've been building a replica full-scale de Havilland Comet. Right now, I've got it in a hangar that I'm renting some space in, and it's a fascinating project. It's just a lot of fun building this thing. But, building a replica jet airliner airplane is not something everybody does every day.
I think that's safe to say. That's certainly not
Yeah.
something I've ever considered, but it's a wonderful project to preserve what is a fascinating and sometimes overlooked part of history. Kind of gets lost in between World War II and then the true boom of the jet age with the 707 and everything. So it's great that you're doing that. Do you think that Comet has sort of an undeservedly bad reputation? I mean, obviously it had some issues that led to it being withdrawn from service, but it does have a critical position in aviation history as really launching the jet age in the passenger world.
It really did. The early models that they built, I think they only built 22 of them, so not many at all. De Havilland did completely rebuild the airplane as a different airplane. It was a completely different animal. So that version, which was called the version 4, was also a tremendously fantastic airplane. By that point, Boeing, Douglas, Convair, these big American industrial giants took over the lead of the market, and the British were never able to recover in the commercial aircraft market from there. So it is kind of sad, but what they gave the world was tremendous. I mean, they shrunk the world with this jet engine technology. They made it possible uh, to to cut in half the flying time. So these days, when you get on that commercial airliner, it's not a bus. It's not automatic. It's not simple. There are no two flights that are alike. The entire flight crew is is working tremendously for that safe flight. It's not automatic, and it's very important that we not take these things for granted, whether you're a pilot, passenger, or anything of the nature, because every flight is a challenge. It really, really is.
All right, Steve, we always end Pilot's Discretion with a lightning round we call Ready to Copy. I'll throw some questions out on a variety of topics, and you can read back your quick answer like you're talking to O'Hare Clearance Delivery.
Got it.
Are you ready to copy?
Go for it.
What's a myth about airlines that annoys you? Something passengers believe that just isn't true?
That it's automatic and we just press the autopilot and go, and that's not true.
Describe a good airline captain in 5 words or less.
Uh, Thoughtful in all respects, from how you treat people to the operation of the airplane.
You spent some time as a flight instructor at a Part 141 flight school. What is the most important skill you need to be an effective instructor in that environment?
Hardworking, diligent, know your stuff inside and out, and always be on your toes.
What was a harder certificate to earn, the flight instructor or the A&P?
A&P by a long shot. That was tough.
And do you think more professional pilots should pursue that, or is it just overkill and too much work these days?
No, it's not overkill. It absolutely isn't. I am so proud of having an A&P. I think every pilot should have one, but yeah, it's great to have.
And I assume another career where mentoring can help an awful lot, get you some hands-on experience.
Absolutely. And I'm mentoring people with the Comet Project.
I believe you got to log a few hours on a DC-8 at one point in your career, which is an airplane that's always fascinated me. So what's a unique feature of that airplane that probably many listeners have heard of but never actually flown on?
Yeah, the DC-8 was an early 50s American jet, 4 engines. It was gigantic. So there was nothing that wasn't unique on the DC-8. Everything was unique about it, some good, some bad. But really, you could put the airplane's engine in, so the 2 inboard engines, you could put them into reverse in flight to increase your rate of descent.
Wow, that's a good one. I didn't know that fact. My guess would be that DC-8 burned more on the taxi out to the runway than your 7.3 does on the way to LA, but that may be overkill.
Yeah.
So you're a bit of an aviation historian, obviously. You're talking about the Comet and the Vulcan. You know your aviation history. Do you have, other than that early jet age, is there an overlooked story or person in aviation history that more pilots should know about?
We all have different interests, whether it's antique flying or just current general aviation, early jet age, World War II, Vietnam, any of these things. I would encourage people, get the books about the subjects that you love, but also get books about parts of history that you aren't plugged into. And it's amazing what you'll learn and find.
I would echo that. I'm a history guy, but I read a book once on ferry pilots in the 70s, which seems bizarre and niche, but it was fascinating. There's a whole nother world out there that, if nothing else, makes you feel very thankful for what we have today.
Yeah.
So in addition to all your other projects, you have a software development company because obviously you're not busy enough with your other projects. What's a skill or habit from that world that can be applied to aviation? Is there something you do in the software world that lends itself to the flight deck?
Yeah. My software company is avtutorials.com and also hangarstack.com. So really having those two things it's another extension of, I guess, giving back to the aviation world. So I'm involved in training pilots, as well as hangar stack is used for managing the parking of jets at FBOs and things like that. So it's great to use all these years of knowledge and apply it toward the software world, where other people can get benefit from all that as well.
So in addition to that, you play the piano and drums, and I feel like lots of pilots are musically inclined. Maybe this is just people I hang around with, but do you think the musical mind lends itself to flying, or is it vice versa, or is it just random chance?
It's funny you ask that. I do think there are similarities. When you get in an airplane, you're on stage, it's go time. You can't pause. And being on stage as a musician, it's the same thing. It's go time. If you make a mistake, you have to keep on going. Something we all tell our flight students. Don't let your mind get bogged down by something. And so same thing, you hit a wrong chord, or you screw up a rhythm on the drums, which I'm a drums and piano guy. You got to keep on going. But it is a lot of fun. It's great having other avenues to clear your mind and go do other stuff.
That's such a good way to say it. I've never heard it put in quite those terms, but it's so true. You're on stage, and once the lights go up, there's no stopping. And so you've got to keep going. That's wonderful advice. All right. So since we're on music, I always like to get music recommendations. So here's a pick one. We're going to talk jazz drummers, Joe Morello or Max Roach. Who's better?
I'm going to go Max Roach on that one. A name I have not heard in a long time, but yeah, I used to listen to him as a teenager.
And how about piano? Give us somebody we should be listening to on piano.
Lyle Mays. He's no longer with us anymore, but if you go on YouTube, just tremendous composer.
All right, Steve, our last question is always the same. You have one final flight. We want to know, what are you flying and where are you going?
The question is, I don't know. So I'd say we're just, building the Comet project, having a lot of fun with that. I'm very fortunate to still work for an outstanding company, and just having a whole lot of fun.
Steve, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, John.
Thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion, brought to you by Sporties, training and equipping pilots worldwide for over 60 years. For more episodes and today's show links, visit sporties.com/podcast. I'm John Zimmerman. We'll see you next time on Pilot's Discretion.